most of us up.
Yeah. I even put on a collared shirt today.
I know, right? Yeah. I was wearing a collared shirt the other day and the mayor said, "Why are you dressed up?"
We are live.
We are live. Hello, Halifax, and anyone around the world who cares to watch the Transportation Standing Committee for February 24th, 2022. I'm your host, Wayne Mason. I'll be chairing the meeting. I'm going to call this meeting to order. I'd like first to acknowledge that Halifax regional municipalities in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional and unceded lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality and all the residents here benefit from the peace and friendship treaties, and we wish to continue to work with our Mi'kmaq partners in the spirit and intent of those treaties. So first things first today, I'd ask for an approval of the minutes of January 27th, 2020.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Stoddard.
I'll second that.
I saw Councillor Kent wave her hand first, so I'm going to go with that. Moved by Councillor Stoddard, seconded by Vice Chair Kent. Any further discussion on the minutes?
Can we clarify, am I still vice chair? I thought Iona was.
Oh, wait. Moved by Vice Chair Stoddard, seconded by former Vice Chair Kent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh-oh. You
I
gave
wasn't
me
here
away.
for that meeting when she was made Vice Chair, so it hasn't really sunk in yet. That's what's going on.
We tried
Any
to have
discussion
a
on the
coup.
minutes.
We tried to have a coup, Mr. Chair, but you know.
Nobody wanted the job, and you all waited for me to come back and take it, and I appreciate that.
Another year.
Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of the minutes being adopted? Opposed? None. Thank you. There's no business rising out of minutes. Is there from any of the members? No. Call for declaration of conflict of interest.
I'd rather be outside.
Oh, we have additions and deletions that you skipped over.
Approval order business, additions and deletions. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Additions and deletions. Approval order business and additions and deletions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
No, I was just
Go
going to say
ahead,
the
Councillor
clerk's
Vice
office
Chair.
the clerk's office has no additions or deletions, and over to the vice chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Krista. Vice Chair.
Stay on the job, you hold his hand, so help him along.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an information item. One that should be brought, item number one that should be brought forward for the next discussion at the next meeting, please.
Thank you very much, Councillor Stoddard. So Councillor Stoddard moves the adoption of the agenda, but and with the information item one brought forward at the next meeting of the committee. Is there a seconder for that?
Second.
Second by Councillor Kent. Is there any further discussion on the approval order of business and approval of additions and deletions?
Question?
Questions been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you for that. We'll move to business arising from the minutes. None. Conflict, call for declaration of conflict of interest. We had one who'd rather be outside. The conflict of interest I always want to make a Transportation Standing Committee is I walk on sidewalks and I drive on roads. It's conflict. Seeing nothing serious, we have no motion. So what's the sidewalk? Short drive. Motion or reconsideration, none. Rescission, none. Deferred business, none. Table matters, none. Correspondence, petitions, and delegations. Madam Clerk, correspondence.
So we've had two general pieces of correspondence submitted from, apologies on my throat, Dan Peterson and Jeanette Holman Price, and that was distributed to the Community Council.
Thank you very much. We have a text here from Councillor Hensby asking when the next meeting of Transportation Standing Committee is, so you can get it on his calendar.
That would be March 24th, and I will ensure that the councillor is invited.
Thank you very much. So that's our correspondence. Do you have any petitions, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, one of the correspondence we received was asking about side guards for trucks, as I recall, which is something I thought we had addressed. Do we actually respond to that correspondence without a motion, or how does that work? I know with a petition, we often respond and we need a motion, but when somebody writes us, and I believe, unless I don't have in front of me at the moment, but I think it was about side guards for trucks, and we've done that. I'm just wondering if somebody responds at some point.
Well, I'll tell you what, just to keep things moving along, I will commit to work with Krista to have a look at it and make sure that there is a response, and I will share that with the committee when it's done.
Super, thank you.
And that's also by way of admitting I haven't read it yet because I'm about 3 days behind on emails. So working on it, but I've made a note and I'll do that. Madam Clerk, are there any petitions?
No, there were not.
Do any members of the committee have petitions? Seeing none. That brings us to item 11, section 11, information items brought forward, January 27, 2022, information item dated January 10th, 2022, quarter 2, Halifax Transit KPI report. So I'll ask staff to present. I will, while they're coming on, just give context to the committee. We bumped this from the last meeting because we had such a full agenda last meeting, and then we have such a light agenda this meeting, but we didn't want the report to get any staler because it's already a month out of date. So that's why we're having this, what will probably be a very short Transportation Standing Committee meeting. So pleased to have staff come forward and do their presentation.
Great, thank you. Patricia Hughes, I'm the Director of Planning and Customer Engagement at Halifax Transit, and I'm here to present the Q2 report, which does include data from July, August, and September of 2021. So as the councillor mentioned, it is a bit old now, some of the data, but the project updates are relatively current. So the report itself contains a fair bit of data. The presentation is more focused on the transportation priority outcomes. There are 3 that transit reports on in these reports, and I'll go through them with a few highlights under each. So the first is safe and accessible transportation network. There are 5 deliverables in the Halifax Transit business plan under this priority outcome area. 4 are still in progress, and 1 is complete at this point in time. So a few highlights: the Paratransit project, the implementation for this project, which is the installation of mobile data terminals on each accessible vehicle. That implementation plan has been finalized with the vendor now. The project's been kicked off and we expect it to conclude midway through this year. Another highlight, the transit code. This is Halifax Transit's guide for passenger conduct and policies. It was rolled out earlier in the year. It continued to be in market, including interior and exterior bus ads, transit shelter ads, social media campaigns, and a full bus wrap, which I saw this morning. It still looks pretty sharp. The anti-littering campaign was deployed back in November. There's an image of it there. Leave your worries behind, but not your litter. And that's still in market today. Another step on this is we've produced new prohibited conduct signs that are going to be installed at transit terminals and facilities. So you'll see those popping up shortly. And we're already working on our next campaign, which will be coming out early 2022. Another highlight, private on-demand accessible transportation, which really means accessible taxis. The RFP closed for this back in October. And the negotiations are underway with the high scoring proponent, and council will see that award report soon. We're actually, it says Q4 on the slide, but we've actually locked down. We're now targeting March 1st for that to come back to council. The second priority outcome area is connected and healthy long-range mobility planning. 6 deliverables under this category, 4 of which are in progress, 2 are complete. A few highlights, the service changes back in November. This is the moving forward together plan, service changes. It seems a bit disproportionate that this is one bullet on a slide, considering the magnitude of these changes and the impact of them. But there were 26 routes changed back in November, which means we've now completed 85% of the moving forward together plan. Another project in these deliverables is Halifax Transit's Mill Cove Ferry service. We're in phase 1 now. Phase 1 is planning and design for this service. Last summer, funding was announced for this phase, and we've onboarded the external project team. There's a lot of work happening really quickly for this, expecting to wrap up the work in the next few months so that we can apply for phase 2 funding, which is the actual implementation of the project. A few more highlights, the West Bedford Park and Ride. This went into service back in November. Some elements were not completed, are still underway, including some of the parking area and a lot of the passenger amenities, bicycle infrastructure, electronic message boards, heated bus shelters, landscaping, partly due to us being so late in the year completing it and not having the ability to do some of those weather dependent elements, and as well with some long delivery times for some of these items. So we do have regular bus shelters there on site for now, but looking forward to getting the heated ones in when they arrive. The Woodside Ferry Terminal. This was a major renovation project, began in October 2020, and we expect it to go right to the end of this fiscal year, wrapping up in late March. We did open the new staircase the other day, so a little bit of progress every month. The new washrooms opened a little while back, starting to look really good. We're looking forward to that project being complete in the near future. The Bears Road Transit Lane, phase 1 of this project is now complete, which is the section to Connaught. The inbound queue jump before Connaught was the last part of this that happened back in November. The third outcome area is the net zero emissions, just 2 deliverables under this item. A bit of a highlight on one we talk a lot about is the battery electric bus project. So of course the funding was secured for this, and the first rollout of battery electric buses in Halifax is a pretty significant project. Planning to purchase 60 new battery electric buses, as well as expand the Raggett Lake Transit Center to accommodate them. So the procurement of the buses themselves and the associated charging infrastructure closed back in January. We're evaluating those now, and we'll be selecting a bus vendor in the near future. Moving on to performance measures. So again, this is for the period that was last summer, basically. Overall boardings increased 16.8% compared to the year before. Revenue increased 57.5%. Daily boardings were 58,141 on weekdays, just over 40,000 on Saturdays, and 29,000 on Sundays. System-wide on-time performance was 81%, which was lower than the year before. And I guess if you recall, it's been between waves, and traffic patterns have fluctuated significantly during some of these time periods. The departure line received over 2,100 passenger calls on a typical weekday. Excessive bus operated 64% more trips this quarter than compared to the quarter before, and 94% of customer feedback was resolved within service standards. The mean distance between failures increased 56%. The mean distance between service calls increased 23%, and the mean distance for excessive bus went up 41%. So those were all moving in the right direction. The maximum daily number of buses that couldn't complete their scheduled service was 13, and the daily average was 3.5. And maintenance costs came in 2 cents lower than the budgeted cost at $1.21 a kilometer. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Unmute. All right. Questions from the committee. We'll go to Councillor Russell first.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate the slides that you showed on the litter campaign and the prohibited conduct. Just curious about what would happen when prohibited conduct happens. So we had the mask, the mandatory masks, but there was no ability to enforce, so we didn't enforce. I heard about a situation in the military some time ago where a person was on guard, guarding a thing, guarding access to a thing, but they were unarmed. And so when someone would approach them, they would say, halt, or I'll say halt again. In other words, they were not able to have any effective means of stopping any conduct that happened. So when we see prohibited conduct, are we just going to say, don't do that? And if you do, I'll just say, don't do that again. Or is there going to be something more effective than that? Second thing is Raggett Lake, the transit terminal itself. What sort of progress are we seeing on that? Thrilled to hear that we're getting the battery electric buses. I'm wondering about the time frame of when those might actually hit the streets. And finally, the on-time performance. I think you would expect me to ask about this every time because I think I do. 81% is low in my estimation for on-time performance, and that is system-wide. We have some routes that are in excess of that, which is great, and that is of course balanced by a number that are not, a number that are less than that. So what would be the strategy to increase that, and how high do you think you would be able to get it? And I know that's close to a crystal ball question, but how high do you think you'd be able to get it over the next few years?
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Staff, if you could share your wisdom.
Or I'll grab a few of those questions first and then ask my colleagues to get some of them. The Regulate Transit Center, as part of the battery electric bus project, is progressing well. There was procurement activities, and now there's a vendor on board to do the detailed design, and we're kicking off the detailed design of that facility. So I believe the kickoff meeting is scheduled for the next few weeks. The on-time performance, as the councillor indicated, some routes fare much better than others. I think that Q2 and Q3 are usually our hardest hit with construction season, right? So I would have to look and see how much of that is really due to some of the significant projects like Spring Garden Road construction, as an example, which would have impacted it a lot. So it certainly is a balance, trying to allow enough running time and not have the buses sitting and waiting. So one of our major goal over the last few years has been to reschedule all the routes with updated schedule adherence data as we implemented them for the MFTP. So we'll be looking to see those 26 routes that were new in November, how well we did with those, and if we improve the schedule adherence for that whole region, and if that can bring our average up, and as well as looking at the third principle of the Moving Forward Together plan is about service reliability and quality, right? So looking at the ones that are the lowest, why they're low. Is it because there's a time point that's not held for some sort of operational reason, or is it a congestion we haven't accounted for, and do they need to be rescheduled? So the focus has been so much on implementing the MFTP over the last few years, but we are turning our minds towards rechecking the schedules, looking to see which ones are performing well, especially as traffic gets back to normal. So certainly front of mind all the time. And I will turn it over to Lynn Llewellyn for the conversation about prohibited conduct.
Thank you.
Hi there. Thanks, Patricia. Hi, Lynn Llewellyn here, Director of Operations with Halifax Transit. So in terms of the transit code and the associated conduct that we've identified as being prohibited, from an operational perspective, we've really tried to focus on learning and education for those folks and passengers that are using our services. And so in order to really ensure standards are being met, obviously we have to set the standards, communicate them, and motivate them. The transit code is really focused on setting those standards and communicating them very clearly to our passengers. I think that having those standards available to us, it's really a tool that we can use to generate awareness as to what the expectations are and what's acceptable for conduct on our buses. So when we're talking about motivating what we would see as acceptable behaviors, I think it's really important that we're addressing individual situations as they're happening, having conversations with folks that are using our service, and treating each situation individually. And so we don't have any specific, I guess you would say, rules in place that would have us remove someone from service for a particular behavior. We would address the situation, as it's happening, and hopefully try to come to some sort of resolution that would make our passenger understand what our expectations are, and so that they can use our service, more feasibly going forward to our standards, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. It says to me that not a whole lot is going to happen. We will have a conversation with them. So would the operator be expected to get up out of his seat and not do his primary function, which is drive the bus, and go and have those conversations about education.
Yes,
Where it's labeled as prohibited, I would hope to see something, a response that would be commensurate with that. So, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
It's just about to call you on time joyfully and with some feeling of revenge. Thank you for that, Councillor. We'll go to Councillor Mancini next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Patricia, staff. Just to build a little bit on what Councillor Russ was talking about, can you remind me of the cameras, where they're located, and what they're pointed at in the buses and on the ferries? Obviously, we have cameras that are looking outside, but we have cameras that are looking inside to where the our riders are.
Go ahead, Patricia.
Yeah, we do have, I'm less familiar with the camera orientation, and I'm not sure if anyone else on the call wants to jump in, but we certainly do have a variety of camera angles, including a camera that does point to the interior of the bus.
Have we had situations, Patricia, where there's been a breach of the code, inappropriate behavior, where cameras have been useful to confirm what the behavior was?
Sure, and I see one of my colleagues is just, speaking of cameras, turned their camera on. I'll throw this one over to Victoria.
Yeah, hi, Victoria. I'm the Acting Director for Employee Support and Development. So my folks are often investigating these types of situations. So with the camera angles on the buses, it's inside the bus, it's pretty well entirely covered by cameras. The audio sometimes is a bit of a different story. It can be spotty depending on where you are, although we typically are able to get most of a conversation. Certainly the cameras have been useful in investigating those types of sort of vandalism or littering situations that come up. And then again, to Lynn's point, how it is handled from there is dependent a bit on the situation and the severity of what's happened. And then with respect to terminals, so either the bus terminals or the ferry terminals, there are cameras inside as well that show video, but they do not record audio.
Yeah. Thank you, Victoria. You know, it's a tough ask to ask our operators to get out of their seat to interact. I mean, we've had, unfortunately, too many examples where they've had to do that, or we've debated should they or should not do that. I mean, that's a tough thing to ask. I mean, you know, I'm not looking for an answer here, but I'm curious, when someone signs up as an operator, is that even part of their their mindset, or why they're expected to do to get involved in an action, an illegal activity, telling someone they put on a mask, and all those issues? That's a tough thing. So, Dave, did you want to comment? I saw you jump in there. So.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I can provide a couple of clarifying comments. Dave Rudy, Executive Director, Halifax Transit. So through the chair, ultimately, when we look at the transit code, as Lynn had mentioned, it is one tool in the toolbox. It's a great opportunity to provide, you know, very clearly what the expectations are and make sure that they're not nebulous. So that's one tool. You know, in terms of response when there's actually an issue on the bus or on a ferry at a terminal, we do have several layers of response that can happen depending on what it is. You know, if there's something fairly minor on the bus, the operator may just be able to deal with it themselves, and it's resolved and the bus goes on its way. Something requiring further intervention, you know, the operators are always connected back to our network operations center through various means, and can contact that for more assistance. And that's when we would maybe send out one of our mobile supervisors, work very closely with both HRP and RCMP. And if you know, if a matter was at that level, certainly they will dispatch a response as well. So, you know, it really does come down to the severity of what's going on in the bus, and we can dispatch the appropriate resources to deal with it. The goal is always to come to some sort of amicable resolution. So we're not denying people service, understanding that A lot of our customers don't have another choice. So if we can find a way to de-escalate and have everyone go on their way happily, that's always the first choice and the first priority.
How's my time there, Mr. Chair, sir?
You have 40 seconds.
So, it's about, thank you. It's, what's unacceptable behavior, right? That's what we really, you can look at it both ways. What's acceptable behavior, what's unacceptable behavior, and how do we deal with the unacceptable behavior? So thank you for that answer. Just my time remaining, I do have a question about the litter campaign. And that's fantastic. The challenge we have, and we had this before prior to COVID, and I'm sure it still exists now, is that not all bus stops have garbage cans. And so, we've had this conversation before. I have my cup, my either McDonald's or Timmy's cup in my hand. The bus pulls up. I can't take my cup into the bus. There's no bus. There's no garbage can in the bus. No garbage can outside the bus. So I throw it on the ground, or I miss my bus. And most likely nobody does that. So that's part of the problem, right? And I don't know how we get around that, but other than putting garbage cans in all bus stops, which I think our residents and ridership will be happy for that, but there's some complications in doing that. So I don't know what the answer is there, Patricia, on that, but that's a problem. What do I do with my garbage? I don't have a place to put it if the bus stop doesn't have a garbage can.
Yeah, certainly, Councillor Mancini, that is a challenging problem for sure. I think that perhaps there's more we could do to message that for new riders. I think most of the riders that have taken transit before many times are pretty familiar with that and are coming prepared with travel mugs or if it's your daily commute, but perhaps there's a way we can further message that in future campaigns so that you're not getting there unprepared with the full importance, right? Because that's the unexpected.
And we do have new riders, especially a lot of the youth with our student program, right? Which is a good thing. And I'm not suggesting they're the ones that are doing the littering, but it is an issue. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it, folks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mancini. We'll go to Councillor Kent next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to follow up a little bit on Councillor Mancini and Councillor Russell's comments around the conflict resolution, because I think that's really where it does sit. It is tough and it is hard to ask the drivers to do it, but really they're really the only ones that are responsible municipally for what's going on there in that vehicle. So it stands to reason that they are put in that position, although we would never want them to be. So that begs the question of what kind of training and resources and tools in their toolbox do we make sure that they have in order to be able to address these things. I'm going to throw in a couple of questions. The other piece is back to Councillor Russell's point around the way we're rolling this out, which I think that the transit code of conduct is really, really important, and it's around education, but it's really not a prohibited conduct because we don't have any policing of it. We don't. So, and Dave Riggy said it, he said it's expected, it's expectations, and it's an expected conduct. So I'm not sure if we should be pitching it as prohibitive, even though we know we really want it to be. I'm not sure if we're getting there. The last piece I want to talk about is just ask you to comment on is the service changes. Of course, a lot of that was focused on the Dartmouth side. And certainly from a District 3 perspective, a lot of changes happen. I'm not a transit rider anymore. I used to be when I was a lot younger, and but it's been a while. And these kinds of changes can be problematic. I think I've only heard from one particular resident who really struggles with change at the best of times. But when we say we're 85% complete, maybe that's changed since because this report again is a little bit older, but how do you measure success in it? Because I'm really curious, how many calls did we get? How problematic was it really for the ridership to adjust to a lot of these changes? Do you have data on that?
That's a great question. So with the previous implementations of the Moving Forward Together plan, we were in a very fortunate situation that we immediately saw large ridership increases. So we were able to measure it with the number of people who were now using the service, presumably they couldn't before or weren't aware of it. So that was a very easy way to measure. I think we will be very challenged with the recent changes because they rolled out and then Omicron hit, right? So we won't have that clean data that we had before, and it'll be more about longer term behavioral change and coming back to transit as restrictions lift. Generally, the 85% is math based on the number of routes. So there's only a small percentage, 15% of routes left, and they're, with the exception of one, all in the annual service plan for next year. So that's where the 85% comes from. And in terms of measuring from a resident satisfaction level, we certainly did hear a fair bit, the weeks leading up to and immediately after the change. We have a list of requests or suggestions. If this schedule moved by 3 minutes, I could connect at this bus terminal better. And so we're looking into all of those and following up on all of those. I would say we had significantly less than we have had in previous years, and we aren't receiving high volumes of ongoing requests or concerns. So it's been a lot quieter than past implementations, which probably is reflective of the fact that ridership dropped off right away in December.
Yeah, it's probably also reflective. I hope it's reflective as well as these kinds of changes have our staff who are on the call center side taking these inquiries and responding to residents. They would be getting more adept at the answering of these and that sort of thing. I don't know. I'm guessing, but thank you for that. So I'm just wondering as well about that conflict resolution style training and things like that for our drivers.
Yeah, I can speak to that. The trainers also are in my group. So when we hire new bus operators, they get 6 weeks of extensive training, and a fair portion of that is spent on sort of what I would umbrella under customer service. So conflict resolution, as well as situations that could arise in relation to that. So dealing with folks who may identify as a protected class, or situations that could lead to conflict. So they are trained on how to identify those situations as well as ways to diffuse them. And that's a significant portion of their new hire training that they get. And as we are able to do continuous training with our existing operator base, they also receive refreshers on advanced customer service or conflict resolution, dealing with difficult customers and situations.
Mr. Chair, am I out of time?
Thank you. You're out of time. You can come back for a second go around.
Yes, please.
Thank you. Not quite Mancini at a time, but like within 10 seconds.
Okay.
Okay. Moving on to Councillor Stoddard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I just had a couple of questions. I understood that the Macintosh location was going to service the electric buses, if I'm correct. And I'm just wondering how that is working out. What's the status of that shop? And my other question was, we're talking, again, going back to the bus drivers and their ability to work on or de-escalate the situation. I'm just wondering, what is the response time for the supervisors that are on the road? Say the supervisor was on Spring Garden and they get a call from, I don't know, just pulling it out of the air. Say they get a call from Oxford Street. Like, what is the response time? Like, how long does the average bus driver have to wait for a supervisor? I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Thank you.
I can start with the first question there. The Macintosh Depot isn't a transit facility, so there wouldn't be any electric bus servicing there. So at the Ragged Lake Transit Center in Ragged Lake, that's where our existing transit center is. So we're doing an expansion to it. So the buses will be stored there, they'll charge there. And we also have a building there that does all the maintenance and work on them. So it'll all happen right there in Ragged Lake. And I'll let Lynn respond to the other part of your question.
Thank you, Patricia. Hi there. So just in regards to the response time for supervisors. So at any given time, we do strive to have at least 4 mobile supervisors out on the road to support our operators. And so I guess depending on where the operator is and where the mobile supervisor is, and also what other calls may be put in place at the same time into our network operations center, the calls do go through kind of a triage. And so depending on the severity of the situation and how quickly a response is needed, that would determine, how the resources are deployed. Ultimately, we try to have our supervisors respond as quickly as possible, within a couple of minutes, but it does depend on kind of what's going on in terms of the whole situation that we're seeing on the whole network at any given time.
Thank you.
Does that answer?
Yeah, I just wondering, like, based on the geography of HRM, is there like one in Dartmouth, one in Bedford? Like, do they limit their areas so that they can be right there if something happens? Like one in downtown, one in...
Yeah, typically we strive to have 2 supervisors on one side of the bridge and 2 on the other. And then they are just deployed again where they're needed, given what's going on. And when there's no situations going on that they have to respond to, they're actively going out and doing checks of terminals and interacting with our operators and just supporting from a service perspective with our passengers and clients that are using the service.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Councillor Stoddard. So for me, just kind of following up what we've heard from some of the members, do we have national benchmarks or internal benchmarks? It's funny. So just a little bit of background. We only started getting quarterly reports about, I guess, 8 years ago. It was an idea we cooked up to try and make the Transportation Standing Committee behave kind of more like a board of the transit service. And it's evolved dramatically over that time with a lot of feedback from the committee. And I'm wondering whether or not, I don't think we've ever established like what is our on-time target or our mean time to failure target. So I'm wondering if, are there national examples of that we could look to, or internal examples, so that we have that kind of information to help councillors and the public, parse that information. As far as the enforcement piece goes, we've talked in the past about having transit enforcement as a next step for if we do outdoor boarding as part of the corridor routes or bus rapid transit, because we have no way of enforcing if someone actually paid right now, is my understanding. We've never done a bylaw on that. We don't have anybody assigned to do that, which could also tie into the enforcement of the code and the other issues that have been kind of identified there. I'm wondering how, in extreme circumstances, has transit ever used the Protection of Property Act to ban someone from the service? Or, certainly I assume that when things hit a certain point, the matter is referred to the police for inspection. So questions about that. And the final question is, do we have, I guess it's still too soon in terms of recovery of ridership, but in other cities that have opened up sooner or seen the, COVID retreat faster, those aren't necessarily the same things as we're seeing across the country. How fast is ridership coming back? How are we doing compared to that? It's so hard to tell where we're at with moving forward together and everything, all the changes that we've made in this environment. But I'm wondering, do you guys have any glimmer of an idea if things stay normal after March 21st? What happens next? How fast is the recovery happening elsewhere? Thanks. Hand it over to staff.
Sure. I think I can handle 2 to 3 of those questions. In terms of the on-time performance, so this is a question that makes its way around planning manager circles probably monthly in my world. And so most agencies either use 3 minutes late, being that it's late, or 5 minutes late. So there's I don't know why nobody uses 4, but it's either 3 or 5. So you have to make sure you're measuring the same thing. We measure with 3 minutes late being late. And most agencies have a target of between 80 and 90%, which I'd say overwhelmingly people use 85%. So we do have I say we are pretty comparable with other agencies, and again, it is a bit how you measure it. I'm not aware of anyone who's got a target that's higher than 90%. And I think there's only maybe a couple that have a target of 90, but they're not hitting it. And I can take that away and double check and do that in a more formal way, but certainly an ongoing conversation all the time between different transit agencies. In terms of ridership coming back, I'm not certain that we'll have a lot of comparables because we have generally fared better than the other transit agencies in Canada. So we're generally, our ridership throughout the pandemic has been slightly higher than average. So if someone across the country, people were seeing about 50% ridership, we might have been at 60. So it's really hard to predict. There's also factors like cities that have a lot of universities versus no universities, and cities where the universities are back in person or they're not back in person. So a lot of factors impacting it for sure. So it's really hard to predict how quickly the ridership will come back. I do know that between waves of COVID, we had hit 70% of ridership had returned. And I'd say we were one of the very few agencies that hit that kind of a high number.
So more of the same, but no way to know when we might get to 100%. All right, very good. Thank you. And I guess that last question was about the enforcement piece. Have we, have we ever referred stuff? Do we PPA people or ban them from the service in extreme cases? And I assume the police are called in if something is extreme.
Yeah, I can take that. So when we look at the Protection of Private Property Act, I view that as another tool that we can use to help support compliance of what our expectations are on our service. And so we do utilize that when possible. We will have certain, I guess you could say, banning of individuals from our premises or various facilities if the behaviors have been quite severe, and we do try to avoid using that. It would be considered extreme or a last resort, because obviously we want to try to continue offering the service to as many people as possible. In terms of if there's any crimes against people or property, anything that would be covered under the criminal code, absolutely we involve police, and police would come and support us and address whatever the individuals, the behavior that may have happened as they were using our service. And sometimes there can be an alignment with the PPA and criminal activity in terms of having a person removed from our service if there's been some sort of severe behaviors or conduct that's happened where HRP has been involved.
Thank you very much. Next on the list is Councillor Outted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Mr. Chair, you touched on some of my concerns regarding enforcement, because you know what it's like, how I feel about when we bring out rules and we have no chance of enforcement of them. And so I want to dig into this a little bit more with the code of conduct, because we hear from the union, we see in the media that we have drivers who feel that they cannot do the enforcement of masks, of behavior, of etc. And we hear about assaults of operators, this sort of thing. So I'm just wondering, a little bit more about, do the supervisors have special constable sort of status that they can issue a ticket, they can actually remove somebody from a bus? Is it time to, and I think you were heading this way, is it time as we get bigger, a city and a bigger service, that we do look at transit police again, and to some extent? And then, of course, I have a question about the Bedford West, happier note on the Bedford West facility. Just wondering if we have any ETA on the completions now. I know we're waiting for some signage, we're waiting for some the heated shelters and whatnot, but I know Dave and I have been talking about a ribbon cutting for a while, but more importantly, really trying to PSA the heck out of this to get people using it, knowing that it's there and ready to go. So a little bit of understanding about the supervisors, the special constables, transit police, and then of course the happier note on when can we think that the transit park and ride in Bedford will be ready to be officially opened.
Thank you. Staff?
Okay, I can take the question on the enforcement and, special constable status. And so our mobile supervisors, similar to our operators, their goal is to de-escalate situations. So if there is any type of prohibited conduct that's happening on our service, they'll come to support, interject, and try to de-escalate what may be happening, and hopefully come to a resolution with the individual where they can continue to use our service safely with everyone involved. We don't have any transit police currently, as you know, and our mobile supervisors are not able to issue any type of tickets that would be provided under any of the legislation. So, for example, a PPA or the Protection of Private Property Act, if someone is banned from our property, our mobile supervisors are not able to actually issue tickets in response to that. HRP would have to come to issue a ticket to enforce that type of legal requirement. So, ultimately, at this point, we don't really have an enforcement role. We have a compliance role. And so the compliance part is really trying to ensure, again, that, our passengers understand what the expectations are and help them, be able to use our service in a way that's acceptable.
Right. So I understand that and I appreciate that. I'm just wondering, as we continue to grow, as maybe down the road we have rear boarding, as we have more electronic ticketing methods and whatnot, that, how do we get this on the agenda to start talking about this sort of thing? So maybe that's a question for the board, for the committee here as well, but maybe we need to start talking about enforcement as well as compliance, which I agree with you. Ideally, we deal with compliance and enforcement is needed, but I'll try and be that optimistic, but we'll see. All right, thank you.
Let's get to the Bedford West question.
Talk about that on another day, and then the Bedford West Happy discussion there. So Patricia or Dave, I'll put you guys on the spot there.
Sure. Based on the delivery timelines, I think the passengers will see progress through the month of March. Currently projecting kind of the last elements to be around the first week of April or so, because there's some landscaping that we really can't bank on March being a possibility. But we're expecting by mid-April it'll be all wrapped up.
So we'll have a May celebration?
Sure.
All right, May Day. Thank you, Cher. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Councillor Outfit. Back to second go-arounds, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So quickly, a couple of questions. Further to the training and the tools that the drivers would have, do we have, and I think about this, a recent television ad that I saw for a person with Alzheimer's shopping. She's forgotten her list. I don't know how many of you may have seen it. She's forgotten her list and she really starts to get quite upset about her list. And do you have my list? She was asking everyone. And then a young man who worked there pops up and he says, I'll just let me handle this. And he speaks to her in a very different kind of frame, because people around her were getting kind of out of sorts, thinking, what the heck's this woman talking about, right? So situational awareness to people, for instance, with dementia, Alzheimer's, autism, those who have mental health challenges. I think about new Canadians coming and orienting themselves to a whole new different environment of getting around the city, things like that. Do you have training that helps our drivers and how they respond in situations like that? Because those kinds of scenarios can often expand into something they were never should have, depending on how it's responded to. The other question that I have is around the stats that we would have, or if we have stats, and how would we be using them in relation to the changes that we are seeing in our driver experiences and on the buses around what we're calling today prohibited conduct, unacceptable behavior. We have frustrated people, we have the debates over mask or no mask, and people challenging each other in public environments, and a simple conversation on a bus can go very awry if you start talking vaccines versus no vaccines and all of that. So have we seen a significant uptick on that kind of scenario since the pandemic? Because there's no question people are short fused, probably more than they would normally be. And I'm just wondering, if do we sort of have the data and potentially see a big change coming forward, which is kind of just hopeful, not necessarily something you can predict.
Sure. Well, I think certainly to that first question that you had about training, when we review customer service with both our new hires as well as our experienced operators, we're looking at that from a multifaceted approach. So to your point, it's not just agitated customers or passengers getting on the bus for who are agitated, maybe I think historically or maybe stereotypically over something like a fare dispute, or more recently mask disputes. We do have, we serve a diverse community and we want to meet their needs as best as possible. So we review that. So, as an example, when restrictions are not super tight, we have CNIB come in and we assist them with training service dog puppies who are learning about the transit system and how they would help someone navigate the system. And then in return, they kind of help our operators have a better understanding of some of the best practices of dealing with those types of passengers, just as an example. So it's not just simply focused on conflict in the maybe sort of historical context, but also just different situations that may arise that could escalate. And that's something that we work on both in the new hire training, when we are doing continuous training that's touched upon, as well as coaching that our operators may receive on the road from the mobile supervisors or from their employee services supervisor in the garage. I think, Patricia, I think you were going to answer the sort of second half of that question.
Sure. We don't have any actual statistics available today that we can speak to. I would say that we do have some ways to measure it. Operators fill out incident reports for the more serious incidents. We also have, they're logged in the software in our operations center when they call in with an issue. But I would say that the data will have challenges related to how often how things are reported and can be reported differently. And were people reporting more or less 5 years ago versus was there actually more or less happening? I think there's definitely changes in the understanding of some of the incidents, especially related to heightened awareness with COVID. So, things that might have been overlooked in the past, maybe taken more seriously now, which is a whole kettle of fish. So I will say that sometimes another way to collect statistics, we certainly looked at mask usage during the pandemic, and I know that's come up from a few counselors today. And we certainly have had customers call in complaints about, someone on my bus didn't have a mask on. And so we have that information from the 311 system as well. But I would also say we did do a lot of spot checks. We did go out and look at buses and do spot checks. And so I will take this opportunity to thank passengers, because overwhelmingly they were wearing masks. And whenever we looked, it was 98% of passengers wearing masks. People that called in and said someone didn't have a mask on, there was other people saying, I haven't seen a person without a mask on my bus in weeks. So overall, passengers did extremely, extremely well with masks. And it was the very, very small minority that we did have issues with. So that's another way that's perhaps a bit more reliable when we're actually able to measure. Related to the prohibited activities, it gets a bit more challenging because it is more about reporting levels, perhaps in some cases for some activities, than it is about actual activities. But we can take that away.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Russell.
Thank you very much. A lot of the other stuff has been discussed. I'm still concerned about the label prohibited because it means suggested based on a lot of what I've heard. Or I also do appreciate that we have the ability to call the supervisors and the police should something become truly necessary, and so that's helpful. So I'm going to jump back onto the on-time performance. This is a significant one for me and speaks a lot to the reliability of someone knows that they can take the bus and have a high degree of expectation that they will be able to get their bus transferred, get the second bus, and get to work on time, then we will see targets improve. We will see behavior improve, appreciation of the system improve. We'll see a lot of good stuff. What we have is what the industry standard tends to be, 85 to 90%. What is our standard for that? And is it a systemic standard, or is it a per route standard? Do we have, are we going to try and achieve 85% or 90% for each route in the system, or is that broad across all routes, so that some routes could be, I'm going to pick an extreme example, some routes could be down at 20% and others could offset that by being up at 95. And finally, what do we have to try and improve what the performance, or sorry, what the on-time behavior is? Do we have mechanisms in place? Are we working towards different things? We do have the dedicated routes and things like that, or sorry, the dedicated lanes. Are we going to be doing more of that? And what else could we do? Thank you.
Sure. So in terms of improving the on-time performance, there's, I think, a few ways to tackle it. One of the most common is transit priority measures that get you through the really congested areas so that the bus is reliably the same running time, regardless of congestion or time of day. Certainly, there's been a large emphasis on those in past years, and lots more to come, I guess, with regards to transit priority measures. Other things we're doing is we work with our colleagues in TPW and planning and development, and a lot of our on-time, a portion of our on-time performance issues is around construction-related detours, right? So can we detour so that it's not really costing us a lot of time, or is it just we're in the congested area waiting to get through the construction area? So trying to mitigate as best as possible, and we certainly are always looking at that and looking to try to mitigate as much as possible. The other thing that we actively do in my team is make sure we're being realistic about the run times. So that was our kind of historic issue that, you know, A to B might have taken 10 minutes in 1985, and that's still all we were allowing in the schedule until 2018. So as we have implemented the Moving Forward Together plan, we do have that schedule adherence data across the network, and we're trying to make sure that those run times are realistic. So we're scheduling with enough time. So those are really the three kind of main ways to tackle it. The other thing is, I guess, looking at the routing in the congested areas and trying to make sure we're not stuck in those pinch points. In terms of what the actual target is, you know, the report suggests that we would establish a target over time. We haven't really formally done that, in part because we were doing this network redesign and changing a lot of things and wanted to see where we stabilized and didn't want to set it too low. But we can certainly come back with a recommendation and an established target for the next quarterly report. And, you know, say this is it. It's 85 or it's 87 or whatever it is. Put the line on the chart and show which routes are above and below target. So we can take that away from the next report for sure.
Okay, and I especially appreciate the second last phrase, where it would be done on a per route basis. That is phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you. So I neglected to ask anyone to put the motion on the floor at the start. So I think Councillor Uthit was perhaps going to do that. Oh, I see Councillor Kent's already on. Councillor Kent, if you put the motion on the floor.
Thank you. I move that Transportation Standing Committee for the information report dated January 10th, 2022, re 2021-22 Q2 Halifax Transit KPI report and Halifax Regional Council for information.
Seconded.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Russell. And we've already had discussion on the motion, just without the motion on the floor. So would someone like to call a question?
Question.
Question's been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much, staff, for that presentation. Look forward to seeing you in 2 months. Onward and upward. Section 12 reports, there are none. 12.2 Active Transportation Advisory Committee did send us a briefing note. I believe that was circulated by email after the initial agenda. Can we have a confirmation? I saw a frown there. Madam Clerk, could you confirm that that was sent out?
It was added to the calendar outlook with the remainder of the package.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Is there anybody on this committee who's on active transportation right now? Did we close the loop on that?
Accessibility, not active transportation. Sorry about that.
I was going to say, Paul, you're not on active transportation. I am.
Yeah.
Did we close the loop on which?
So are you? So you're on active transportation. So if we have any, if anyone has any questions, you can address them to Councillor Kent.
Sure, you can.
Seeing none, we'll move on. 12.3 members of Transportation Standing Committee. There are no motions there. There are no motions under 13. There's no in-camera items. There are no added items. There are notice of motion. Madam Clerk, just to confirm, no one signed up for public participation by noon yesterday.
That's correct.
Thank you very much. The date of the next meeting is March 24th, 2022. I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
So
Mr.
moved.
Chair, I think it's worth noting that the tremendous job that the member in the Active Transportation Committee is doing, that you're so well informed that there's no need for questions today.
Golf claps for the Active Transportation Committee and its council member.
There was no seconder for that comment.
Tony, you were my favorite. I'm not sure anymore.
Hey, I brought you wine and candy.
You did, Paul.
You're going to ride that to the end of your career, aren't you? All right. I heard a motion from Councillor Russell to adjourn. We are adjourned.
That candy was from last Halloween, though. It was in his daughter's bedroom.
It was on sale. It was